Welcome. My name is Manny. I'm very honored to have you all here. In support of Mark Sutton, let's give Mark a round of applause. He has taken the time and effort and energy to write this book, How Democrats Can Win Back Men. Okay? This is an important subject, and I'm excited that we get to host this here for you. And also, Mark and I went to the same college, Williams College, which is a very small school, so there are not a lot of us out there, alums. So one, go Eefs. And we haven't had a lot of Eefs actually on this stage, so it's nice to have a fellow Eef here. I just want to say welcome to Manny's. Manny's is a physical space for civic and political conversation. You notice there's a lot of chairs around you. We're hosting another event at 7 o'clock, so this is going to be zippy, but we like a zippy event. And just watch this space. We'll be doing programming every night of the week for the next 100 days around this election, around local, state, federal elections, international politics, all that stuff. So without further ado, I will give the mic to you. Both of you have a mic. And
All right.
welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you, Manny,
You're welcome.
for hosting us at this fantastic space. Thank you.
Okay. Are we live? All right.
And this is Nevada. Came all the way from Portland to be here to join us tonight. So Nevada, take it away. Thank you.
Right, yeah, thank you. I am Nevada, as Mark said, and I'm very happy to be here this evening. I've known Mark since the inception of this book, this project, and when he said that he was going to be doing a book talk tonight, I literally drove down in one day from Portland to be here for this, because it's that important. And I'm super just honored to have an opportunity to introduce Mark for his book talk today. So Mark Sutton has lived in San Francisco for about 15 years. He moved here to attend Presidio Graduate School. Since then, he's worked in community development finance for Northern California Community Loan Fund as a nonprofit consultant. He's appeared as a gender issues expert on MSNBC and CBS Radio, and he's produced content for NPR, Air America, and Mother Jones Radio. He's also been a registered Democrat for 35 years. So I've seen Mark pouring his heart and energy into this book on a topic that he feels very passionate about, and it's about winning back men for the Democratic Party. Women's issues are rightfully going to continue to be a major focus throughout 2024, but as he points out, that doesn't have to be at the expense of men's issues. Democrats traditionally lose the male vote, but gaining just a few percentage points with men, especially in those swing states, could make all the difference this year. So Mark examines the voting statistics and the trends while compassionately highlighting issues men face with regard to education, life expectancy, and suicide. The full title of this book is How Democrats Can Win Back Men, Why Understanding Male Voters and Their Issues is Vital for Democratic Victory. And here's what some people are saying about it. Dr. Warren Farrell, the author of The Boy Crisis and the former Democratic candidate for the governor of California in 2003 recall election, said, How Democrats Can Win Back Men could be the most important book ever written toward both a 2024 Democratic victory and reversing the loss of men in the next decades. Vicki Latham, former president of the National Organization of Women D.C. chapter, national board member when Betty Friedman was president, and integrally involved in the landmark Roe v. Wade case, said, in his amazingly well-researched book, Mark Sutton, devoted Democrat, makes a plea to his fellow Democrats to care equally about today's boys' and men's needs. His argument is overwhelming and convincing. If Democrats listen to his concerns, they have a better chance of winning the next election. So things have taken a pretty big turn this week.
To say the least, yes.
Yeah. What an election season so far. After Biden dropped out, San Francisco's own Kamala Harris is the likely Democratic nominee.
Woo!
Yeah. So now Mark is going to share his talk about insights we can take from historical data about the gender gap and gain insight into the 2024 election outcome. So Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Nevada. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate you coming to learn more about this issue. As Nevada said, this is something that I've cared about deeply for a long time. And I'll get into exactly when I started it as I get into my talk. So I have a few slides with a few charts. I'm a data analyst, and so I like data, but the important part about data is getting to the story behind the data. So we will look at the data, but the important takeaway I hope for everyone is like, what does this matter? Why did I spend all this time writing this book? What are the insights that I'm looking at? So the book is called, he said, How Democrats Can Win Back Men. And a lot of people said, why did you call the book that? And I said, because Democrats have been losing men for decades, and that's really costing them. And a lot of people just aren't even aware of that fact. So first of all, why should Democrats care about this? The first thing is obvious. If more men vote for Democrats, they have a better chance to win the White House and Congress. Right now, it's 50-50 in Congress, Senate, and the White House. It's really, really close. I think it's gotten maybe a little better this week, but it's really challenging. And also, understanding everyone's needs better and the issues, it's better policy. You're going to have better, your constituents are going to have better lives because you're actually paying attention to everyone. So here's just a few different outcomes, and I want to make something really clear too. As Nevada said in the intro, and I'll say again, and I reiterate this very frequently, we need to take care of everyone, and of course, women and girls issues this year in this election in particular are very much front and center, and that's great. I support women and girls. I mean, I shouldn't even have to say that, but I just always reiterate that because we have this kind of false duality where sometimes we say, oh, are you for men and boys or for women and girls? I'm like, for everyone. And in fact, what I call it in this book, I call it the all-demographic strategy. So if you remember, Howard Dean had the 50-state strategy from 2006 to 2012. Here's what the Democrats said. They said, you know what? If you're a Democrat in Mississippi, we're going to support you too, even though there's no way in heck we're going to win your electoral votes. But we're still going to support you because you're a Democrat and that matters. And I think we need to do the same thing with all demographics, because I feel like certain demographics don't get listened to in terms of the democratic messaging. So I'll get into that. And so the reason men and boys are struggling, that I worked at the Northern California Community Loan Fund. I don't know if anyone knows that organization, but that's here in San Francisco. And one of my roles was to research social outcomes of the communities that we serve. So we help low-income communities and nonprofit organizations, and we would look at the demographics and see how people were doing, and if they did better, that would be a positive sign. So I got used to looking at this. So I've also worked for a lot of nonprofits that support male well-being. There's one group called the Boys Initiative, which supports boys in education because boys are doing poorly in education right now. And so I started to look at all these different things. So here's just a few items. Men's life expectancy is currently 5.9 years less than women's. And Harvard Magazine came out with a big article about this a couple years ago, and they said, hey, this is really troubling, and it's getting worse. It went from 4.8 to 5.9 in the last 10 years. And they said, we don't know even why this is happening. So that's one item. Another thing, in 2022 in the U.S., we had 130,000 what are called deaths of despair. So deaths of despair are suicide, opioid overdose, and alcoholic liver disease. So basically, pickled liver, people call it. 130,000 of these preventable deaths of men in 1 year. That's over twice the number of men killed in Vietnam. And, that's an issue that we need to have more awareness of. This issue, the prison industrial complex, I think is very well known in Democratic circles as something that comes up a lot and is something that is one of my most important issues. And this is, one of those issues where you also see racial inequities. There absolutely are racial inequities in addition to other things. And you see that in prison, but still 93% of all the incarcerated people in the U.S. are male. Then education, as we said, right now, only 40% of college students are male. That's, a very low number, and men are dropping out of college. They drop out of high school more often. They're less college ready, et cetera. So those are some of the issues that, I think the Democratic Party could address. So this is, all right, I know Isaac here said he likes the data set, so I appreciate that. I know we got some other mathematically inclined people here too, which is great. So we have a few graphs here, but this is the main one. This is the basic data set that I kind of started studying with. So this is presidential voting by gender. starting in 1972, going all the way through the last election, 2020. And you can see here in 1972, I love this graph because this graph kind of shows a political history of the United States for the last 50 years. 1972, Nixon, look, he won by 25% among both men and women. Then after Watergate, which doesn't Watergate seem trivial compared to the stuff that's happened in the last 4 years? I mean, my gosh. Anyway, but at the time, Watergate was a very serious deal. And so 76, you can see men and women both voted about +5 for Jimmy Carter. He was a one-termer. Reagan came in 1980. And by the way, we've got a couple of trivia questions. One is just about to happen. So you can see 1980 was a very important year on this graph because you can see that's the year when this gender split really started. Before that, it was even, and you can see it goes all the way throughout the years, and it seems to be just essentially growing larger and larger. And I think that's, to some degree, a reflection of the growing cultural divide in our country. I think there's and this is just one aspect of it, but I think it reveals itself in this chart. That's why I say I'm a data analyst. I like to look at numbers and what's the story they tell. And when I look at this graph, I say, whoa, there's something going on here. Because it's a pattern. It's not just 1 year or 2 years. It's a 40-year pattern. All right, so we got 2 trivia questions, and the first one is right now. And what was it going to be? Oh, wait, hold on. I got to check my notes.
I'll be watching for that first hand to come
1980. Okay, I'll come back to the trivia question in a second. Wait. Oh, no, I'll do it. I'll do it.
No, you
Hold
can't tease
check
us.
my notes. I'll check
Now,
my notes.
now we need it.
Now we need it. I know, I can't tease like that. Hold on 1 sec. Oh, yeah. Sorry. So Ronald Reagan had a slogan. Yeah, okay, so who knows what Ronald Reagan... All right, over here.
It's already over.
Close, very, very close.
That one?
That was another one too. But one of the slogans that he used, I'm going to give you credit, let's make America great again. So it was very similar to Trump's slogan, but it was let's make America great again. And so these type of slogans, it's not too uncommon to have we used to be great, and, then the other party got in power and they ruined everything, but let's be good again. Happy days are here again was FDR's slogan, right? So this type of thing isn't too uncommon. So you win a book. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, it's really important to know history because when, Trump came out and said, make America great again, it's like, oh my God, I've never heard of this before. It's like 30 years ago. It's like somebody had almost the exact same, expression in their thing. Anyway, so that was 80. And then you can see 84 went even farther conservative for both parties. For both genders. Now, we get up to 1992. Notice it narrows a bit there this year. And this shows a little bit. This is just data. It's not a complete data set because it doesn't include third parties. It does not include anyone who doesn't identify as male or female because that hasn't been tracked. I'm just using the data that I'm given. When I have that type of data, I always like to use it, but it's just not included in this data set. But you can see 92 was very close because Ross Perot got about 20% of the vote that year, and he got a lot of the male vote. He got more conservative vote. And most people think, it's generally understood that without Ross Perot, Bush probably would have won a second term. So that was really important. It's interesting. And then 96, Clinton did really well, plus 16. That's the best any Democrat has done with women in this whole time period. Anyway, so moving forward a little bit, you can see just generally things widen. And I'm going to add a line in here. I call this a magic number at minus 8%. So what does this mean? What is the magic number? Magic number means every time the Democrats are at least minus 8% or better among male voters, they have won the White House. Every time Democrats have been worse than 8%, so minus 9% or more, they have lost the White House. This has happened every single time for the last 50 years. So you would think, at least as part of a strategy, let's try to do a little better with male voters, at least minus 4% or maybe even break even. Yeah. All right. Well, I've got to get there. Thank you for the question. So that's just a really important data point to know. If you look at the numbers, okay. Well, since there was a couple months ago, there was a poll, and Biden was plus 17 among female voters and minus 19 among male voters. So if you understand this graph and you see that minus 19, you're like, he's dead in the water. So a lot of my friends would call me like, oh, I know you're writing about the election. Like, who's going to win? And I'm like, it's not looking good for Biden right now because he's at minus 19. So that's a very good question. That's what I always like when those polls come out, like the New York Times Siena poll is one that I like to look at. I go right for the voting by gender, and I look at those two numbers. And the other thing I really like about this, just one last thing about this data set. I really like this data set because it's kind of simple. Again, it's not 100% complete, and I should also mention these are exit poll numbers, so they're not perfect. There's a little bit of variation. You know, there's a margin of error on an exit poll, but they're good. The pattern is the same. There's a few different exit polls. There are, be a couple points here or there once in a while, but this is generally, correct. But I like it because you're breaking the entire electorate down to two parties and two groups, which there's not a lot of other data sets that have that simplicity in their power. There's a lot of power in the simplicity of that data set.
Mark, are you saying that with men, they don't even have to be even with Democrats? It's just less than 8%.
Right, because you can see, because Democrats have done a great job of messaging to women. A lot of women are pro-choice, and that's a big thing. That and they just, if you look at, we'll look a little bit later at some of the messaging from the Democrats. They're doing a great job with the women. So, you can see women plus 12, 13, 14, 15 the last few elections. I mean, it's not, one thing that's kind of surprising, Hillary was, with women was plus 11, and then plus 13, and Biden was plus 15. So Biden actually did better among female voters than Hillary Clinton, which surprised a lot of people.
That just seems like a very low bar to step over.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, if you just get up to -4, it would be very, very, very likely that you would win. You don't even have to get to break even. You get to -4, especially this year, I think, the way the polls are looking with so that we get. And then one last thing about this data set. Let's just look at the male voters for a minute. Again, that -8 line is there. Every single time that the Democratic Party is in power, so that's represented by the D on the bottom line there. Every single time the Democrats are in the White House, from the next election, they lose male voters, sometimes very significantly. Okay, so you can see Carter won in 76, got crushed in 1980. Bill Clinton he got a +3 among men, and then he went down, not too bad though, to -1. But you can see Gore he went to -11 among men. So that was a big decrease, and people were shocked when he lost that election, but it was mostly the male vote that did it to him. Okay, so if they had done a better job of appealing to male voters at the ballot box, I think they would have won, and that could have really changed history because we know how things changed after 2000, right? That was crazy. Same thing with Obama. So I mean, think about this. In 2008, when Obama was running, the other party had almost caused a global financial meltdown. We were in the middle of two unpopular wars, and Obama won by 1% among men. He was an amazing candidate, so charismatic, such an amazing person, and still only won by 1% among men. So that's something to keep in mind. And then Hillary Clinton came in 2016. She lost men by 11%. So again, it went down. Now, Biden, he got just up to -8. He just got up to that magic line, and he barely won. And if you look at, the percentages, it's not that different from Hillary, but he had a couple percent more. It was just enough to get over that hump. So Hillary won the popular vote. Hey, welcome. Thank you. Hillary won the popular vote by 2.1%, lost the election because of the Electoral College, right? So there's another thing to keep in mind. The percentage of the popular vote is just one aspect of it. You have to look at the Electoral College, obviously, because that's how you win. Joe Biden, he ended up winning the popular vote by 4.5%, and he won the Electoral College. So just a back-of-the-envelope number, and this is something I want people to come away with. And this is one of my colleagues from NCCLF. Welcome. So one of the things I want people to come away with on this is that when you see polls that are saying, if it's going to say Harris and Trump are even in the popular vote, that really means the Democrats are down by about 3.5 to 4%. Because it's not fair. I don't like the Electoral College, but that's the way it is. That's just how the votes kind of line up in the swing states kind of against the Democrats, and it's kind of not fair. Like a vote in Wyoming sort of counts more than a vote in California. And that's not really fair. And we know that California and New York, for instance, are going to overwhelmingly go for the Democratic candidate, but it doesn't matter how many million you win by in California if you lose the swing states. So let's look at these swing states real quick. Swing states. These are the 7. So we've got Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, and North Carolina. So last time, Biden won 6 of the 7. Okay, this is this. I look at this table and I get scared sometimes because whatever this table looks like on November 7th for the after the next election, this table right here is going to tell the story of this election. Because if one or other party wins all of these, then this is gonna be over for sure. So if you look how Biden did among, again, women versus men, in every state Biden lost among men, and often by double digits. Interestingly, Arizona was fairly close. It was I don't know why Arizona would have a closer gap than the other states. Again, this is polling, so there could be a little error in the numbers, but I find it pretty fascinating. But look how close those margins are: 0.3, 0.3, 0.6, and 1 point to those 4 in the middle there, just so close. And Republicans only need to flip 38 electoral votes from last time to get to 270 this time. So there's different ways they can do that. Now, the Democrats are saying if they hold the blue wall of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, that would give them 270 even if the Republicans win those other 3. But that's a very thin margin, and with all this funny elector stuff going on and all these lawsuits, and I mean, you don't want to just put all your money on trying to win by 2 electoral votes. I think you really want to try to get every single state that you can. So a word about messaging. I think messaging is so important. And one of the things that has frustrated me when I wrote this book, I like a lot of the Democratic Party's policies. That's why I've been a Democrat for 35 years. And actually, a lot of their policies do help men. For instance, I love the fact that Vice President Harris wants to legalize marijuana because that will get a lot of men out of prison. As I mentioned before, 93% of the people in prison are male. By getting rid of that and expunging those records, that's going to help a lot of men. So, I mean, I want, and I'm going to reiterate this because some people came in later, and I just want to make sure everyone 100% understands this. I support the well-being of everyone, regardless of personal identity, of, age, race, sex, sexuality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We want to help everyone. But just in terms of messaging, I think the Democrats, they just have this opportunity right now to reach out to this huge group of people, 48.7% of the voters, that they're not reaching. And just message better with the stuff you're already doing. If you get 2 or 3% of the vote in these 7 states, it could just completely change the balance of power for decades. And they just refuse to do it. So when you look at sorry, I'm getting a little worked up. I'm going to try to relax. My wife told me, Mark, don't get too upset. You get a little worked up sometimes. So, Josephine, unfortunately, my wife Josephine isn't feeling well today. So, Josephine, I hope you feel better. But she did tell me don't get worked up. So, I'm going to chill out. Josephine, that's for you. Okay. So, just looking at the 2020 Democratic Party platform, when it came out, and that's when I got the idea to write this book. Somebody asked me, when did you get the idea to write this book? It was the moment the 2020 Democratic Party platform came out, because I read it, and there was a lot of great stuff for women and girls, which is awesome. I 100% support that. And I'm like, well, do they have anything for men, like life expectancy or men's health or prostate cancer, like something low-hanging fruit that's not controversial, that's just something everyone could support? And there wasn't. So I did, being a data analyst, what did I do? A word search and counted, right? So I counted up the words. And so the words men or man appear 10 times, the word boy or boy 0 times, women or woman 69 times, and girl 4 times. So you can see right there, 73 to 10, and all 10 instances of the word men and man, I go through this in the book, it's all like Native American men and women, something, men and women of the military. So it's great to be inclusive in those instances, but everything else, there's not a single issue specifically for men or boys, despite all the poor social outcomes that I, just talked a little bit about earlier. I think the Democrats should shift that. Again, transgender, non-binary mentions, fantastic. I think it's great. It's inclusive. It shows inclusivity. So that part is good. So there's a lot of good in the platform, but when there's just no mention of a single male issue, I felt, I'm getting worked up, aren't I? I felt abandoned. I kind of felt abandoned by the party. I'm like, I've been a registered Democrat for, at that point, 30 plus years, and you want my money, and you ask for money. I've done phone banking and canvassing and all that good stuff. And then now you're coming up with your platform, and you're just saying, yeah, we don't want to talk about anything that might, help you. And I just kind of thought, I didn't like that.
This didn't this come out in some of the earlier iterations of the title of your book?
Yeah, originally, because I had what do you call that? It wasn't exactly a breakup, but we were taking a break. And so I was going to call the book A Man Without a Party. So you might have heard of the book A Man Without a Country, so A Man Without a Party, because I was feeling very frustrated and not really connected with the Democrats. But then when I read Project 2025, I was like, oh, man. Okay, I'm going to write this instead. So just looking forward real quick, and then I'll get to a couple of quotes in the book. There's two scenarios. Let's just imagine from today until 2036, okay? And this is just hypothetical. Anything could happen. Different messaging could happen, and who knows what could happen. But this is just possibility. Let's just say the Democrats continue to do poorly with men. For whatever reason, they don't appeal to men, whether it's the policies or the messaging or a combination of both. And those red arrows show men at minus 10, 11, 12, 14. And women are still voting very much Democrat at about the same level. If they're in the 11, 12, 13, 14, and the men are minus 11, 12, 13, it's got to be 20 years of Republicans in the White House and the Congress. And then they'll completely own the Supreme Court by the end of that. And so if you're a Democrat, I would just think, you don't want that, right? On the other hand, the happy version. So let's say, what if the Democrats do a better job of appealing to male voters? And again, when I count the numbers and count the words, I'm not saying it needs to be 50-50. I'm not saying it needs to be every little thing. Just generally appeal to male voters and some of their issues. And if they do that and they get it up to, happily in 2036, I just put the number 0, so they got to even. But even if they're just above that minus 8 by a few points or better, they're most likely going to win, and they would most likely win the Congress and Senate rates in the swing states as well. So I just think for not very much change in policy, mostly in messaging, and a little bit of different outreach, the Democrats could really have a lot better next 16 to 20 years if they do this. So that's kind of my basic thesis. So that's in a nutshell my concept. So
excellent.
Yeah.
All
so
right.
should we get? I want to read a couple quotes from the book, and then I think you have some questions for me, and then go ahead. Oh, the second trivia question. Let's do that. Let's do that right now. Thank you. Okay. Oh, and this one is a good prize. Hold on.
For the record, they're both good prizes.
They're both good prizes, yes. And you can't win again. You can only win once. Sorry. I know he wins everything. You win everything. Yeah. So here's in the spirit of the moment.
All right. It might be a little small for you.
Yeah. This would have fit you anyway. So the T-shirt. So question number 2 is, I got to read it again. I don't know why I can remember everything but the trivia questions. That's not good. Give me 1 second. What's that? Because they're trivia, I guess. Yeah. I remember. Okay. In 1984, and I'm gonna read a quote about this in a second, but I'll ask the trivia question first. 1984, Reagan crushed Walter Mondale. Don't answer. I know you know. This guy knows the question before I even ask it. The question is, which single state did Walter? You can't answer. You already won. Which single state did Walter Mondale win? He only won one state. Nope. Minnesota!
Oh,
Yay! Awesome.
We got a winner.
We have a winner.
Winner, chicken dinner.
All right, what's your name? Andy. All right, let's have a hand for Andy. Yeah. All right, congratulations, Andy. Right, he only won one state. And the reason why...
Only won one state.
What?
They both only won one state. Dukakis only won Massachusetts when he went against Reagan. Mondale only won Minnesota.
Okay, yeah.
I get 2 shirts.
All right. You're going to get a whole wardrobe after. We'll just go shopping at that store like 3 doors down. That's awesome. Thank you, Thomas. Okay, I got a couple quotes. I'll read the one relevant to the trivia question here. So I want to just talk about this origins of the gap. That year, 1980, remember we talked about. That's the year that gap really started. Richard Wirthlin is the name of the guy who was Ronald Reagan's advisor for his career. And he had this to say. So there was a great book. There's not been many books written about this subject. There was one written in 2007, kind of similar, called The Neglected Voter, White Men and the Democratic Dilemma. But it's only focused on white male voters, but it's very similar. It's the closest book I've seen to anything that I'm working on. It was a great book by David Paul Kuhn. But he interviewed Richard Wirthlin, who said, the question they always asked was, why is Reagan doing so poorly among women? But that's only one blade of the scissors. The question I was always interested in was, why was Reagan doing so well among men? And later he said, it's been a mystery to me for 25 years why that hasn't been recognized. So that's kind of interesting. This guy's a mastermind. He had the two biggest landslide victories with Ronald Reagan. You know, this guy knew politics. He knew campaigning. And he's saying, hey, we were, nobody asked us why we did so well among men. Nobody ever asked us. So I thought that was a very interesting quote. And let's see, I want to get to another quote here. I talked earlier about how it's so important for us to think about everyone and be inclusive. And that's why I call my strategy the all-demographic strategy. It includes everyone of every race, every sex, everything. And I know I repeat that a little bit ad nauseum, but it's just so important to do that. But the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, put it this way regarding support for our boys and men. He was quoted in an online publication called Inc.com saying, I have noticed that there has been resistance to acknowledging that from people who worry will take away attention from the continuing effort to ensure that girls and young women also can progress and that we close the equity gap for them. I would not choose between my son or daughter, and I would not accept that as a choice that any of us should make. We've got to do both. And I thought that was very well said. And he also has spoken on men and boys and men and their poor educational outcomes and other things. So I thought that was a really good one. Going back to the 80s again real quick. So how are we doing on time, by the way?
We've got about 3 minutes until questions.
Okay. Real quickly, so Judy Mann was a writer for the Washington Post in the 1980s. And so she had a quote, so shortly after that. So by the way, Richard Wirthlin, he is credited with inventing the term gender gap. That's the guy, that's the first time we started hearing that phrase, gender gap. Judy Mann is considered the first person to popularize it. She's the first person to write about it. She wrote for the Washington Post. And then she had an article in 1983 called Gender Gap. So right before that landslide 84 election, she wrote, President Reagan does indeed enjoy greater support among men than among women, but it is neither reliable enough nor numerically substantial enough to offset the losses among women voters he can expect in a re-election bid. So I think the mistake that was made was they thought they were doing well enough women to offset men. And then they ended up losing among both anyway. But I just think that's something, that's just like a word of caution. It's like a tale of caution, like to not fall into that trap. And then the last quote, and again in the Washington Post, another great writer. Her name is Christine Emba. She wrote this great article last year in the Washington Post. It won an award for Article of the Year from the National Press Club. So it's a really fantastic article called Men Are Lost. Here's a map out of the wilderness. So it was a great article, and I read it when it came out. I was like, wow, that's a good article. She had a lot of good information in there about some of the issues that men are facing and the Democratic Party not addressing. It's kind of similar to the topic of my book, this article. And I reread it about 9 months later after I had been studying these issues more in depth, and something really jumped out at me. So here's a quote from Christine Emba's article. She was interviewing a Democratic strategist who said, there's a temptation to minimize men's problems, and this is quote, to minimize men's problem references to masculinity altogether. One Democratic strategist told me about how specific references to men in political speeches are often stripped out for fear of offense or to signal broader inclusivity. So I just think that was like, oh, after doing all this research and word counts and like all this stuff, I'm like, oh, they're just very actively saying, don't talk about men as a strategy. I mean, apparently, if you believe this anonymous source, they're very, and it made sense. I was like, oh yeah, that is what they're doing. They're choosing. It's not that they don't know. They're just choosing to do it. So I just think maybe they should try something else. I think they should just be a little bit more broad with their messaging, which I don't think seems like such a radical idea, especially when you look at the numbers. But that's my basic thought. And Nevada, what you got?
Oh. So I know we're going to be heading into Q&A here shortly, but
Okay.
I do have a couple of questions I wanted to make sure got out there. I think a lot of us are probably wondering, now that Biden's dropped out, Kamala is the presumptive nomination. How do you think that will affect things?
That is a great question. I've got a lot of DMs this week with that same question, which I appreciate that. I mean, first of all, the whole last month has just been insane, from the debate to the shooting to the RNC to Biden dropping out, and then a whirlwind of support for Vice President Harris like I've never seen. I mean, I've never seen such an outpouring. So it's been really fantastic. I mean, it's just been a really interesting time to look at it, and it's been really interesting to see that. I would say a few things. She seems to really have this, it's hard to put a number on it, but when somebody has just a lot of energy and positive attention, that really goes a long way. As I mentioned when we were looking at the chart, Bill Clinton was somebody who was very charismatic, and there was some unusual circumstance, which it was a third-party candidate that got 20% of the vote. So you add charisma plus kind of weird circumstance, that's an opportunity. 2008, you had this global financial meltdown. You had 2 unpopular wars, and then you had an incredibly charismatic candidate in Barack Obama, and he won pretty well. He won with among men. Now you've got kind of a similar thing. You have this last-second change. You have someone that at least initially seems to have a ton of charisma and a lot. She's really getting people excited. And you have some weird circumstance because Joe Biden dropped out at the last second, and you have this a Republican candidate who's just, I want to say this in the right way, but he's unique. And he's very divisive, I think is the word. Like, some people really like him. They have a Trump thing. Some people are, really don't like him. And one thing about Manny is, I want to say this too, this is an open space for civic dialogue, and anyone can come here with any political point of view, and I think it's important to respect that. I was here for the debate night. There were obviously some Republicans here for that. And Manny, I believe, Manny's wants to support civic dialogue. So I want to make sure anyone here, whatever your viewpoint is, that you feel comfortable asking a question. Whether you disagree with me or not, that's totally fine. I respect I respect that. But so does that answer the question of Kamala? Yeah.
I feel like, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Next question.
Excellent. Let's see. Maybe I'll do one more, and then we'll put it out to the audience. So a lot of people have called this book compelling. I was one of them. What I would like to know is what compelled you to write the book?
Yeah, I guess it would be going back to 2020 when I saw a combination of that, the 2020 Democratic Party platform. By the way, I went back and looked at 2016, and it's pretty much the same. So a combination of kind of feeling frustrated, but then also seeing I did not like some of the things Republicans are saying. I'm a moderate Democrat. I don't disagree with everything that every Republican says, but I definitely fall more in line pretty significantly with Democrats. But I've got a lot of friends who are more conservative, and I think it's good for us all to be civil. But what really motivated that book was a combination of some things I didn't like I was hearing out of the right wing, and some of the things I didn't like I was hearing in the 2020 platform. I got to do something, so I wrote the book.
Thank you. Well, I want to make sure we have some time for other folks to ask questions. So I already see a hand up. We'll get the mic to you.
I think you've made
just 1 second. We're going to get a microphone so we can record this wonderful question.
Thank you. I think you've made a good case for the importance of the gender gap. I mean, and you've shown, just historically how when it's widened in the way it has, that it's been bad for Democrats. I'm interested in why men tend to vote more for Republicans than Democrats. And you seem to suggest that maybe it's messaging, that the Democrats just haven't done a good job. And, do you think it's more than that? Do you think it has more to do with cultural issues and the cultural difference the way men see themselves in the world, and somehow that causes them to gravitate towards a more conservative ideology?
I do. I think you're right about that. And I guess, when I talk about trying to adjust this, I'm thinking like the messaging can really reach the people more in the middle. If you got somebody very far on the very far right who, is absolute Second Amendment extremist and wants the Ten Commandments in every schoolhouse and stuff like that, that person is going to be hard to reach by saying, hey, we're going to create an Office of Men's Health. Like, they're probably not going to care. But I think there's a lot of moderates who would be more open to that messaging. But it's a good question that you asked, yeah. Here.
What change do you think they should make, the Democratic Party should make in policy, and then what changes in messaging?
Okay, great question. So there are, in terms of policy, I think they should just start with some real low-hanging fruit. So in terms of something simple, there was a bill that came up in 2023 called the Office of Men's Health and Awareness Improvement and Awareness Act. There was a New Jersey congressman named Representative Payne who brought this up. He started the Congressional Men's Health Caucus. So we have 8 offices of women's health, which is fantastic. And part of that was because in the past, women's health wasn't taken as seriously, so we created this extra office. Well, now men are dying 5.9 years earlier, prostate cancer, all these other issues. And so Representative Payne, whose own father had died young, created this great bill, and it created this whole Congressional Men's Health Caucus. Biden would not support it. And then, I was hoping Biden would say something about it maybe in the State of the Union this year. And instead, he didn't mention anything. And sadly, about a month after the State of the Union, Representative Payne, at the age of 65, passed away from a health condition, okay? It's really sad. And, I'm sorry, I get a little verklempt, but it just made me very sad. So that's an example of something I think the federal government could do, very low-hanging fruit. I don't think anyone would be offended by, trying to help men live a little longer. I think it would be a good thing. So that's an example of a policy. In terms of messaging, as I mentioned, the Democratic Party platform should just have a couple, again, low-hanging fruit, nothing controversial. Let's support boys in education because they're falling behind. I don't think most people would have a problem with that. Just signaling that a couple major issues like health and education, we're going to focus on the male aspect of these, and that will help the Democratic Party, I think, just get a few more % of male votes, which, as I've shown with the numbers, could make all the difference. So those are a couple of examples of just non-controversial things that are very much in alignment with Democratic Party principles that I think would be easy to do and wouldn't be unpopular. Isaac? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that before Biden dropped out of the race, there was, I believe it was a 19% negative for men.
Yeah, that was an
maybe more
April
Republican.
poll. I mean, polls fluctuate a bit, but
Right.
there was one in April was -19, yeah.
Back in April was -19. So
Yeah.
that was even before the presidential debate.
That was before the debate even, yes.
Okay. Obviously, there's a new candidate now, and I'm sure it's far too recent to begin polling that.
Right.
But that's quite a big jump to try to make if we assume that the -8 is the winning milestone. So do you think that there's any messaging that can be done in the next few months to make a jump that large?
Well,
do you think it's realistic?
yeah. I mean, I think just having a new candidate who's younger and more vibrant, that might help a lot, particularly with young male voters. I think that might make a difference there because in terms of young male voters, Biden won them by 26% in the last election, and then there was a poll in the LA Times in the spring. He was only +6 with the young male voters this year, a 20-point drop. I do believe Vice President Harris, if she most likely is going to be the candidate, I think that number will go up, and I think part of that number was also because of all the Middle East stuff, all the campus protests was part of that. But yeah, there is time. The platform hasn't been released yet, so 15 people sit in a smoke-filled room. I've tried to contact people who write this platform. I know somebody who who was part of the last team, but I haven't got a response yet. But just put, again, a couple pieces of low-hanging fruit in there. Doesn't need to be radical, doesn't need to be the least bit controversial.
Thank you.
How we doing on time? We got one more?
Be the
Last question. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Just real quick, I think the big messaging structure, I'd like you to answer this,
Okay.
is the differentiation between masculinity and the male. Because masculinity is a social construct. Male is a biological reality. It's one of the reasons you find, I'm deep into this space, so I know it very well. And so one of the problems you find, you're drugging boys in school at significantly higher margins, right? Because of attention deficit disorder. They don't have attention deficit disorder, right? And so the messaging that I see attacks the masculine as a failed social construct, but as an actual identity, as opposed to the male itself. Male biology in the brain is different than female biology in the brain. That has been established time and time and time again. Yet the messaging doesn't acknowledge that. And its representation is found in things like educational outcomes, covert depression versus overt depressions, right? And how we respond to depression.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the masculinity versus male
Okay.
and why that messaging is not happening in this space. Does that make sense?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking us. The question was about masculinity and messaging and maleness. And, that's some good question. I know there's some authors who write about masculinity. I'll say this. So on the Republican side, Senator Josh Hawley wrote a book that was focused more on masculinity and those differences. And also, Senator Marco Rubio, he wrote a 40-page report about men and men's issues. And so I would just say this. I don't focus on that concept of masculinity in my book. I'm more looking at the data of male and female voters. So I don't feel comfortable totally. Sorry, I know it's not a good answer to end on, but I don't feel 100% comfortable answering that just because I haven't studied the concept in the way that you asked the question. But I will say that the Republican Party, if somebody else asks how come they're doing better, Josh Hawley wrote a book about masculinity in men, and here's what they can do. Here's what we can do to make men. And he does talk more about the differences that you talk about. He does talk more about masculinity. You might agree with Josh Hawley, you might not. I don't agree with everything in his book, but he's at least talking to men about them being men. And is it surprising that the party that reaches out to a certain demographic actually gets more votes from that demographic? Like, what is the alternative that a Democratic senator wrote about men? There wasn't one, right? Which part? Okay. Oh, the social outcome data? Okay. Okay, that sounds good. And afterwards, so we're going to have to wrap up here now, but we can continue this conversation outside. For those of you who don't have a book yet, I'd love to get you a book. Thank you all so much for being Nevada. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for coming.
Make sure to grab your book on your way out the door. We just
And
teased the sequel, apparently. We're going to have book 2 coming out shortly.
Round of applause for Mark Sutton. I'll just
Thank
ask
you.
everyone to exit through this back door if you don't mind, because there are 200 people on that side, and you do not want to walk through them. So,
Okay, so for those who want to hang out, just walk up back to the front, and we'll
Yes.
meet up at the front.
Go out through the back, and then go back out through the front.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you, everyone.
We love you. What do I do what?